Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, and welcome to my video game review of Octopath Traveler. Of course, like every other video game review, I will be splitting it up into two different parts, story and gameplay, as those are the two aspects I primarily look at when I'm looking at a video game, as long as it is a game that has a story, that is. So far, it's been doing me pretty good, I think. And don't worry, unlike a certain video made by Video Game Donkey, this will be a full review of the full game, not looking at a part of the game and making a comedy review of the game. This will be a full review of the story and the gameplay, and I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. So with that being said, let's start with the story, or should I say stories plural, as you start the journey as any of the 8 characters you wish to choose. I think this is a pretty good way to start your journey. Not really knowing which to jump in, it really comes down to which character looks the most appealing and what character's story looks the most appealing. I personally chose the merchant Teresa as I ventured forth, and as you make your way across, you come across the other adventurers, and then you can take part in their stories as well. And each individual story of the 8 are unique and varied, which makes collecting all of the adventurers worth it, in my opinion. And missing out on characters is gonna lead you down to missing out on, well, the story aspect of any of their stories. So it is how you complete the game as well. So if you're looking for that completionist outlook, you will end up collecting all the adventures and leveling up them anyway. So there's that. I think having 8 unique stories with 8 unique paths is a really interesting way to go about it. It doesn't feel like there was any lazy part in the story part with the 8 different stories. It felt like 8 different characters going on 8 different adventures, which was really, really well done. And just going across them, seeing how the characters would sometimes interact when you get to certain areas with each other. I'm pretty sure I probably missed some of them along the way, but as you sort of make your way through, your characters start to interact with each other more. You start to get in these 3-way conversations that you can have with your party, depending on who you have out. Again, I guess these are more unique reactions within your party. So yeah, it definitely holds a very unique perspective. It's pretty hard to choose what character story I liked the most. I felt like Furion's story had, your thief who was put in a place of feeling forced to be a thief, and he eventually came across someone he had to work for, and it became a situation of just trying to do the right thing for, the release, and then go on with that. For Cyrus, it was an adventure of knowledge, and, people who seek out knowledge for the wrong purpose to do overwhelmingly evil things. Annette had her assassins that she wanted to get revenge on, and she held strong to her convictions. We have, I'm gonna forget some of their names now. Teresa and her merchant adventures as she journeys forth into selling things. I think it'd be better if I remember some of their classes as well. You have the warrior. I'm having trouble remembering his name at the moment, but essentially he's a warrior that had a great cause. He had something to fight for. He lost it. He was trying to find a new thing to serve or to fight for, and he eventually found it within this small town. We have the cleric who's just trying to heal people and journey through her guiding light path. You have the apothecary who's trying to also help people in his own way, comes across some unique individuals that are struggling to heal only certain people, and so on and so forth. So each of the characters, as I mentioned, have their own unique story, and playing them out, as I mentioned, is probably the highlight of the game. It's probably what most people will remember of Octopath Traveler. So, in terms of storytelling, I think this is definitely one of the more unique stories in getting that variety and getting different perspectives and having this party interact. It feels very classic RPG meets Dungeons and Dragons type of adventure, with a full cast of characters with different classes that can sort of min-max their classes with like mixing into other character classes along the way, and I'll talk a little bit more of that in the gameplay section. So in terms of story, I didn't feel like there were any parts where I was just like, this is dragging on. I felt every character's story had an even amount of chapters to them. So there's that. Yeah, so really great storytelling. I would give Octopath's various stories a 9 out of 10. Pretty close to a 10 out of 10 in my book. Definitely, again, the highlight of this video game. Its gameplay is pretty simplistic. It follows a very classic RPG style. And that's where I'll start to talk about the gameplay. So it's very turn-based, and as you will note in the gameplay, it has a braking system. In other words, when you hit enemies with certain types of things, they will potentially lose their turns as you continually hit them. And as you sort of journey across the land, you can start to discover enemies' weaknesses and start to really hone in on on breaking their turns and just comboing them to death. And in terms of flow, from the beginning of the adventure, as you start to pick up your teammates, I would say the gameplay is a bit grindy in a natural RPG sort of way. And I do feel like the progression is pretty even. I feel like the beginning is relatively easy, and as you pick people up and start to come across some challenging enemies sort of in the mid-section, it starts to have that just the right amount of level of escalation, or just barely feels like you can do it, but you can if you start to optimize how your characters fight. And the game will guide you in that sort of way. You'll start to notice the obvious things to do, the attacks that you'll want to prepare. It'll give you the level cap at the bottom, so you know what areas are too dangerous to traverse without, a little bit of that grind in the earlier areas. So the game does plenty to give you the right tools for the job, including side quest. Now, this is where I will say the gameplay does falter a little bit, as some of the side quests are either extremely easy or extremely convoluted. There doesn't seem to be a good in-between, I feel like. As some side quests, as soon as you enter them, the solution stands right in front of you. Or it's convoluted and tells you to go somewhere else, and you have no clue where that somewhere else exactly is, and when you get there, you kind of forget what you're trying to accomplish, as the explanation within the side story is cryptic and vague at best. This is definitely where I feel like Octopath Traveler could have used a little bit more in terms of its writing within its side quest to sort of guide players within those contexts to make those quests a little bit more, have a bit more of a flow. as I do feel like either, again, there doesn't really seem to be an in-between for side quest. So there's that. And then there's, as you progress through the game, you start to realize that you could give your characters secondary classes. And this is where the game starts to even out a little bit. It's still in that challenging area, but you're starting to figure out, okay, so I can have my cleric also take on more spells if you give them the other cleric or apothecary abilities, or, you know, mid-maxing between the, again, the different sort of classes there. So that will carry you through like the early 20 through 30 range of levels. The other thing I will note is that when you have your full party and you have 4 people in your party and 4 people at the inn, the people at the inn will not get experience for the party, which is something I found a little odd. I thought that they would get a smaller increment, but sort of level along with you. But the grind, once you get to this part of the game, does become relatively easier. So I suppose there's that to factor in as well. It's a little annoying, but not too annoying. It's, you know, it just etches into that territory of annoying, if you will. So you have those classes, and as you journey through the later quest in the game, you start to realize that there's secret bosses in the game that will unlock secret paths and clothings and classes for your characters. And I will say that's the second spike of the video game, are these challenge bosses that require you to at least be either level 50 or again have the correct gear / optimized abilities. One ability lets you get above your maximum HP, which is probably the most overpowered and necessary skill to get in the entire game, and just equip it on everyone. And that's, of course, when you get it through the clothing and get the proper gear and then equip the proper skill. As soon as you get it, I would, again, recommend just putting that on everyone, and then the game will sort of ease itself out from there. Once you unlock the secondary costumes, the secondary secret paths or / classes, this is where the game totally flatlines out and becomes an easy just finish off the rest of the story gameplay after the fact. As I quickly started to note, the magic casters actually became much more overpowered than the sword-wielding characters. Cyrus, in particular, for me, became the most overpowered character when I equipped him with the ability to cast 3 spells in a row and do at least like 5,000 damage a turn, 3 times in a row, by the way. So that's an easy melting ability. And then once you give him his abilities that mesh and save him his magic and damage, again, he becomes the most overpowered character in the game. So and I suppose, technically speaking, you could also do that to the cleric as well. She is also a magic user, so she could probably match that in relative terms. The other characters, it will become pretty evident which ones are weaker in terms of magic. The apothecary doesn't have much in that regard. The warrior, obvious that he doesn't have much going on in terms of magic. The dancer doesn't have much going on in terms of magic. And Therion, of course, doesn't have much, in terms of magic. You have your beast hunter, Hanette, who doesn't have too much in terms of magic. I feel like out of all the characters, I felt like, in terms of uniqueness, came Hanette, but that also came with, I felt like her abilities sort of made her slack behind for me in terms of gameplay. But I was still interested in her story of her hunting and trying to save her. I think it was either her father or her mentor. I forget which it was, or if it was both. But trying to save someone she cared about dearly for in an initial way. So yeah, magic became the very prevalent way to handle the remainder of the game in terms of going through it. And of course, learning when to pick up certain items and grind certain enemies for certain items as well to get that heal that heals you maximum HP. Just learn what enemies do that through a little bit of research and going on from there. So there's a little bit of that classic vintage way of like, oh, how do I handle this situation? You may want to, if you're not doing it already on your own, if you're not figuring it on your own, it does come in handy. And there are little snippets of characters' abilities that come throughout. There's Teresa's ability in the beginning to make money relatively easily. For example, you can talk to the people at the town, and, when they have a little marker on their head, and if it's, like, not a side quest, or if you, like, talk to people and do, like, Cyrus's ability to, like, gain information, you can get, like, discounts and all this different stuff. So there's plenty of here to ease you through the game. Once you learn the little nuances the gameplay does have to offer. So in terms of that, I do feel like for the most part it's almost a solid, close to 7 out of 10, I feel like. I would say, again, the only thing I would mark in terms of a negative would be the side quest. And the not leveling up system for your party, but that's a little bit more easily managed in terms of just grinding. It's not too difficult to grind the character to the level it says for them to be recommended to do their quest. So it's not terribly awful in terms of that, so I think that complaint is foregone. So again, I would lean a little bit closer to a 6-ish short of 7 out of 10, if that makes any sense. I do feel like they could have polished the side quests just a bit more. I do think that they can be engaging, and they do give you certain rewards, so there is that, obviously, so they can boost you in your way when you can figure them out. And with that, that is my full review of Octopath Traveler. If you're interested in this RPG, I would recommend looking at the other game that came out recently. I haven't played it myself, but I'm assuming I forget what the title is, but it looks very reflected of Octopath Traveler, in terms of gameplay at least, where it's very vintage RPG, very vintage storytelling in that regard as well. So yeah, if you're, again, or, you can also look at something like Final Fantasy VII Remake if you're looking for a remake. So there's that as well. So yeah, that's my full review of Octopath Traveler, and if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One to head you over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated, and until next time everyone, bye bye.